Ralph Walters left the family farm in southwest Colorado for a career in film and television. Lighting was his specialty, on sets for shows and movies. Little did he know that a friend's request for help would lead him into a completely new industry and now a fight to save the business that he has built in Montana. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Ralph and his wife, Jamie, own JBS Solar in Missoula, Montana. During our conversation, he will explain how he went from the farm to become a business owner in the solar industry. He'll also explain why he felt so compelled to travel to Washington, D.C. He was working to convince Congress to reconsider what could be some major changes for energy. But first, let's start with Ralph on the farm. All right, talk about your background a little bit, because you bring some ag street cred.
Yeah, I grew up in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming, which is in the southeast corner of Wyoming, and my family had a dryland wheat farm just south of the border of Colorado, there in Weld County, and so that's how I grew up. And then in about second grade, we moved to southwest Colorado, where we had some other family land with some cousins and things, and we grew beans and wheat there, right up through when I started college, pretty much. And then my dad retired. Everything kind of went in CRP, but yeah, I grew up on a farm all the way.
So somehow, somewhere, sometime, solar piqued your interest. How'd that happen?
Yeah, I had a buddy in Colorado, a very dear friend of mine. His family bought an off-grid cabin to
Okay.
family time at. And at the time, I was a set lighting technician for film and television.
Huh.
And he cornered me, said, "Hey, you know about electricity? Help me figure this out." And so I got super excited about solar. I did. There's a school in Colorado, in Carbondale, Colorado, called Solar Energy International, and I took every class they had, and I just fell in love with the technology and its potential, and that was going to be my next career. And so moved to Colorado and tried to get a solar job there, and that didn't quite work out. Then my wife and I moved to Montana in 2014, and I quickly got a job here with the company that I now own.
Why'd you pick Montana?
Originally, my wife was going to school here. She wanted to do a graduate program at the University of Montana here in Missoula, and that didn't quite pan out. And we just fell in love with the place and decided to stay.
Let's talk a little bit about the growth of this business. Now, before we started recording this conversation, I joked with you that you made a joke that that's you've exploded in growth staff-wise, not because of your skills, but because of the demand. And as I said, both things could be true here. But
Sure.
talk a little bit about the growth. So you bought the business from your old boss, and
Right.
I mean, you have had really steady growth since then. How's that happen?
Yeah, so I started working for the company in 2014.
Okay.
And then my wife and I bought the company from my mentor and boss and his wife in 2020. When I worked as an installer, we would do between 50 and 60 projects a year. Um, and that was just kind of the steady flow of it. And then they wanted to retire, so we bought it in 2020, which I've already said. And we were kind of plugging right there, 60 jobs for the first 2 years, kind of at the tail end of COVID. And then all of a sudden, the Inflation Reduction Act passed. It took the tax credits, which were dropping. This is the 25D tax credits that came from the George W. Bush administration in 2005. They were going from like 30% to 26 to 22, and then the IRA bumped them back up to 30 for the next 10 years. And so a couple things happened simultaneously. One, the tax credits got locked into place, and so people that were thinking about it pulled the trigger, and so that was really exciting. Also, during the pandemic, Missoula, Montana is one of those places that are really beautiful and people want to live here, and the pandemic gave them an excuse to move here. And so all of a sudden we had a huge influx of people from all over the country. A lot of them had solar where they used to live, or they were already in the mindset of having solar. Um, and this is Montana, so people that move here come here with the idea that they want energy independence and independence across the board on so many levels, and solar is a big part of that. And so that growth We went from 60 projects a year, give or take, to 80, and then 105, and then last year we did 135. And so we've exploded. And when I started, I was just 6 employees, and now we have 15. And so it's just been trying to keep up with the demand.
What is it about solar? Like, why do you love it like you do?
Well, I mean, it's just a really neat technology. You take this piece of glass that's encased in an aluminum frame and you aim it at the sun and it gives you electricity. Simple as that, right? It's just but you couple that with like maybe a battery backup system where you tie it into the grid at your house, and all of a sudden when the sun is shining, you're not consuming electricity from the grid. It's not coming from some hydroelectric plant 1,000 miles away or a coal plant 1,000 miles, whatever. It's coming from your roof. And there's empowerment there. It's just a really neat technology and it feels good. And then, if you get battery backup, then if the storm comes and knocks out power, you're the only guy on the block with the lights on and the freezer's safe and your game is good and you're just you have resilience, you have independence. And it's just a good way to save money, right? So in terms of like all the products that I could sell or buy or any business that I could do, I like the impact of this. I'm an environmentalist, which in some circles is kind of a dirty word, but like that's a big component of what I do. I'm a steward of the land. That's the way I was raised. And to me, solar is a practical issue and a practical solution for everything that we need.
All right, so you're cooking along, you're hiring people, you're doing way more projects than you used to. Then the U.S. House of Representatives passes a bill, and now it's awaiting some action in the Senate where it will be changed. But with that, that was kind of the impetus to launch you went to D.C. to try to talk to these folks to be like, wait a minute here. So what's your argument to them? What's your sales pitch?
Well, so when we sat down, Montana is a big state, but it has a small population. So we have the 2 senators that everybody has, and we have 2 people in the House of Representatives. So we have a small delegation. One of our senators, Senator Steve Daines, is a senior senator, and he's been there a long time. And so
Mhm.
he has some power, and he has a good position in committees that are important to energy. And so we went there. It was myself and 3 other solar people and efficiency people from Montana. And we went there to just let them know that solar doesn't need subsidies forever, right? Like it's, we want to play on an even playing field where practical, common sense, affordable way to make electricity. We don't need tax incentives forever. But to go from a 10-year plan, which is what it was, these tax credits were supposed to expire in 2032. And that's the plan or that's the framework that I use to grow my business, to go from, an additional 8 years down the road to all of a sudden it ending at the end of this year potentially. That you can't grow any business with those kind of um, in that circumstance. There's just no way you can plan. There's no way you can grow. There's no way you can do anything but be reactive and defensive, right? And so we went there and we spoke with the staffs of all of our representatives, and we basically said, look, the United States needs energy. We need independent energy, right? And so if we can grow that in our backyard by collecting it from the sun, that is independence. That is energy independence. And so we should be encouraging small businesses like mine with a framework that is fair. So to go from 10 years to 18 to from 10 years to 6 months isn't very fair. So we went there to ask for basically I guess the phrase is glide path, right? Start bringing
Mhm.
it for the next 2 or 3 years. And we got a lot of positive feedback. And I think the finance committee today came out with some language that's helping some of the tax incentives with that glide path. So our industry's voice was heard on some issues. The 25D, the residential tax credits are still right on the chopping block. So we have a lot of work to do. But yeah, our message was give us fair ground to stand on to where we can adjust, make the best decisions, keep these good jobs that we've created. Otherwise, we're just gonna have to shut down, maybe something bad.
So you got folks in solar, folks in wind, kind of all making similar arguments here about you need some kind of support and it can't just disappear. Does you tick you off when you're looking at this, big picture, if they're looking at, all right, we got to save some money here. We're a gazillion dollars in debt. We got to cut some costs here. And they're trying to also pay for future tax cuts as well. Does it tick you off when you understand that oil companies are still getting tax credits after 100 years or whatever it's been, 100 something
Sure.
years?
Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you for acknowledging that. There's a lot of people that don't quite realize that, right? And incentives, subsidies, tax breaks, all those things. As a nation, we provide those things to industries so that the consumers and the citizens of our nations have a stable background, right? The price of gas may go up or down, but it doesn't drop through the floor, or shoot through the roof, right? That's what good policy does, is protect the consumer, protect the citizen. And so, yeah, I have frustrations with the idea that oil and gas still get better deals than solar. That's kind of always been the case, right? Solar goes up and down, right? For some reason, solar is a politicized issue, which is unfortunate. It's a practical energy issue from my perspective. It's just electrons and photons and turning on the lights, and it's one of the cheaper ways to do that. So yeah, it is frustrating um, to have it not seen in that from that practical light, if that makes sense.
Nice play on words there too. Play on the practical light. So what, I mean, this in the agriculture world, you've got different communities where people have different schools of thought on here. You have some people who do not believe that big solar panels should be on land that could be used to grow stuff.
Sure.
What do you say to those people?
I think that that's an absolutely fair point, right? Like, why would you put solar on the most verdant fields in Iowa and not the hard desert of Nevada, right? And so I get that entirely. Um, but there's a lot of space for solar, whether it's above parking lots or in places where it's not in somebody's view shed and it's not taking away viable ag land. There's lots of property in this country that receives lots of sun and can be impactful. In terms of big solar farms eating up ag land, I get that concern, and it's a valid one. What I do, our systems are primarily residential and very small commercial, and it's rooftop solar. And so you talk about using space that's not doing anything else but keeping the rain off your head. Solar does that. And so we're not taking away ag land. We're not interfering with most people's view sheds. Your solar might be visible from your neighbor's front window, but it's not that unappealing, in my opinion. I think they're kind of nice looking, but I get it. Um, yeah, big solar projects, it's a harder pill to swallow, especially if it's going up close to you and you don't quite get it, or if it messes up what you think is your way of life. I understand that. Good solar companies should be reaching out to the public and figuring out the best solution. And opposition for no other reason than I can see it doesn't make any sense to me.
So from your time out in DC, do you get the sense that there is potential here for some kind of compromise, that there can be the glide path that you talked about, so it's not just immediately shut off? Like, what's your sense talking to people?
I think that there definitely is room for compromise. A phrase that gets tossed around a lot is the idea of the all of the above energy,
Hmm.
right? The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. Sometimes gas doesn't flow. Like, you need to have all those options on the table because we use more and more energy all of the time. So we need to have that perspective, right? And that makes sense on a very practical level. And that means you're going to be using coal and natural gas and those things. But if you can save those finite products by using renewable energy and make their finite supplies last longer, then why wouldn't you? Right? And so having an all of the above scenario is appealing to most people. That makes common sense. The other side of it is just the economics of it. A nuclear power plant might be a good idea, but it takes 20 years to build and it goes over budget 100% of the time. It goes over budget 100% of the time. And so in that amount of time, I can help 4,000 families start making their own energy. And so, like, there's just like I said, solar has become politicized some way, and it really shouldn't be that way.
But do you know, well, like, why? What is causing that? I mean, because you could argue the same thing about probably wind too. Like,
Sure.
why is it now? You described yourself as an environmentalist, but that, as you well know, that label can fit a bunch of people in a bunch of different ways, right?
Sure.
It can be somebody on the far, far political left if you want to take it to politics. But I mean, a lot of farmers, frankly, and a lot of people in ag would maybe they don't use that term environmentalist, but they do strongly believe in being stewards of the land and the water. And maybe
Right.
people view it in different ways, but how, so why do you think this became politicized like this?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I mean, because somebody called it the Green New Deal and that pissed
Okay.
enough people off, right? I think it's about optics and it's about who who you may disagree with vehemently on the other side of the aisle, right? It's about personalities, which again doesn't make any sense. Solar was pretty much created by Bell Labs in the United States of America 50 years ago, and it's been going strong ever since. Even if the residential tax credits disappear, my business may shrink, but it's going to continue on. Like solar has a practical application that ought not to be vilified, in my opinion.
I'm curious, a lot of people have brought this up to me about the way Congress operates and does, there's this idea, this idea, this idea, this idea, this, and it's all put into these humongous, ginormous plans, budget plans typically, but so much stuff in there that I'm curious when you're out in DC and you're trying to focus on your slice of this, does it drive you nuts because there are so many other components to this that could screw you?
Sure.
Because you have different legislators putting in different priorities, then you get this big, massive thing like this, and you could be punished because somebody's opposition to one of the other pieces.
It's incredibly frustrating. And I don't know what it takes to be an elected official. It's a hard job. You have a lot of people to answer for if you're doing your job right? And so it's a cacophonous, right? And so to have our tax credit go up against other tax credits, right?
Hmm.
Like tax savings versus tax savings doesn't make much sense to me. To have something that has to do with energy that we all use and then pit that against, well, you can't pay for this if you also have benefits for our veterans. That doesn't really make sense to me. It seems like we could do things with a little bit more precision and better thought out instead of going in with a sledgehammer and just, I don't know. It is very frustrating.
I'm sure you would prefer to leave things as they are, but do you have any idea what an acceptable glide path would be to you? That
Yeah,
you
and,
could
and
still make a
myself,
go of it?
sure, myself, my competitors, my employees, we all talk about it and try to figure it out. I think a 2 to 3 year window would be enough. So the Inflation Reduction Act, love it or hate it, did a lot of really great things. So there's a huge onshoring of solar technology that's been happening since it passed, right? There are companies bringing in their plants in Texas and Florida and Georgia, hundreds of millions of dollars to make that stuff here. And they've done a really good job of it because, again, the Inflation Reduction Act gave them sort of a solid ground from which to make those hard, heavy, expensive decisions. And it's happening. So, SBS Solar, for the first time ever last year, before the election was even decided, we committed to buying solar panels made in Washington. We're like, okay, this is the year. The
Hmm.
price had finally dropped to the point where it was competitive with we were buying panels from Vietnam and other places overseas before that. But for the first time ever, a panel that fit our requirements, right? It can stand the snow and the wind that we face up here in
Yeah.
Montana and cost a reasonable price, then yeah, I'm going to buy that from an American company if I can, or produced in America. I'm going to do that if I can. Same thing with the electronics that we use. The two big players in the market, SolarEdge, Enphase, these are different technologies, but they have plants in Texas now, and they were able to pull those plants in from wherever they were before, and I don't pretend to know because the because they were incentivized to do so. And so for the residential solar market to fall off the face of the earth, to be cut in half basically overnight, like those companies that have made those big investments are going to be left hanging because that's a significant portion of their business. So right now, the information, the verbiage that's coming out of the Senate Finance Committee is that some of the industrial tax credits will remain, and they already have their glide path fit in, right? And
Hmm.
so those companies can start figuring that out, but the residential is going to fall off. And so one thing that maybe a lot of folks don't know is, again, 25D residential tax credits began in the first Bush administration in 2005 or 7, I think '05. And it set this up, right? And it's been going ever since then. So of the IRA, which is an incredibly massive, expensive endeavor, 25D residential tax credit is only 2% of that, the cost of that legislation. And it probably impacts the most people, right? Because mom and pop Main Street buy solar because they want to lock in their utility rates and they want to invest in their future and improve the value of their home and all of these things. They get a tax credit on their income tax, which is money they've already paid taxes on, right? Like, so of all the things that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act, 25D seems to be the most impactful, common sense, least expensive for our federal government. And it's the first on the chopping block. That's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating. It's too bad.
Well, I know you're trying to talk to as many people as you can about this, and you want to get people to talk to their elected officials as much as possible. I appreciate the time to walk us through all this.
Yeah, of course, Dave. I appreciate the invite and I appreciate the time. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I've never done anything like this, so I did my best. It's a complex
You,
issue. There's a
you
lot
didn't
to it.
envision yourself traveling to DC, huh?
No, that was a complete surprise too. What an incredible trip. I may not agree with the way things are turning out, but it felt really empowering that I was able to sit down with the senior staff members of those senators and congressmen. And I may not have got what I wanted, and I'm still fighting for that, but they were listening, or somebody was listening. It was both inspiring and incredibly frustrating. So,
That's probably a good way to explain DC.
but
You can learn more about Ralph in our profile piece about him. It's in the weekly American Farmland Owner newsletter. It's the place where landowners get their news about policies, politics, technology, changes, and opportunities that impact farmland ownership, operations, and investing. Find it now at AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast. We hope you'll like and share, tell everybody how awesome this podcast is and humble. Thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.